Welcome to the Speak Like a Leader podcast with John Bates. Welcome to the show. With me today, I have someone who specializes in something that I used to really avoid. And I think you'll really enjoy her. I'm looking forward to talking with her. Her name is Marlene Chism, and she is the author of From Conflict to Courage. She's a consultant, speaker, and leadership coach. And one of her main topics, as you might guess, is difficult conversations, working with high conflict people, conversations about performance. And she's a real proponent and advocate of personal growth. So I think you're going to enjoy the conversation today. Thank you for joining us. And Marlene, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much, John. I'm excited to be here.
Well, good. I'm excited to have you. So listen, let me start out kind of different than I usually start out, but I always figure out, I know for myself, like I'm always teaching what I need to learn the most, right? So where did this need to learn and then teach and train around difficult conversations come from for you in your life? Is that an okay?
Wow, that will take up the whole podcast. What I can say though is that I first started getting interested in kind of family dynamics and psychology. And, I had kind of a dysfunctional upbringing like a lot of people have. And
Yeah.
it's like, when the fish is in the water, they don't know the water is muddy or clear. And
Yeah.
when I took my first psychology class, so that's the very beginning of all this, I realized that these problems had been studied. There were names for it. There were
Yeah.
models for it. And I really learned about personal responsibility. And it was the beginning of my journey of growth, of realizing that I could be the creator of my life and that I didn't have to repeat patterns. And I just had a thirst for that kind of knowledge. So it started there, and it really increased when I learned about this tool called the Karpman Drama Triangle. I don't know if you know about that tool.
Let's talk about it. Keep going, but
Yeah.
let's come back and you can explain it to us maybe.
Yeah, so it was when I learned about the Karpman Drama Triangle, I was really investing in myself for personal growth, and that triangle was just such an eye opener for me, looking at my own patterns and how to take responsibility and not blame others, and looking for patterns that indicate personal responsibility. All that was really interesting to me because I wanted to create something else for my life. So that was really the beginning of it, and it really just evolved because what I wanted to do was to become a professional speaker. That was the beginning of the journey. And I was a blue collar worker for 21 years. So I worked in a factory for 21 years, doing everything from packing cheese to stacking skid to driving a forklift to tearing down equipment for sanitation. And I thought, I've been here, at that point, probably 15 or 16 years. And I thought, gosh, what else is there? So it was that journey of asking myself, what else is there? And is this going to be the end of my life where I'm retiring with a gold watch and looking back on a full life that was unrealized in a sense? So I just started learning about these models, and I wanted to become a professional speaker. And that happened. And then I started doing training. Like that's kind of an evolution. You'll start to do training and put training together and teaching. Then it turned into some consulting. And now it's really a combination of those things. But how I got to the place about difficult conversations was because I was working with an organization, a very large franchise. And part of their leadership academy, I developed what I called with them the performance conversation model. In my book, it's called Skills. It's a blueprint for conversation. So it started with a need in my journey of businesses and individuals and leaders needing to be able to talk about things that were difficult. And then I started to see that pattern that almost every organizational problem that escalates can be traced back to a conversation that should have happened but didn't. So in me doing the research and the work and the training and the coaching and the consulting, obviously you start to look at your own life because you teach what you need to learn. And so if you're going to teach it, it doesn't feel good to think that, well, I'm all that in a bag of chips, but like, let me tell you what to do. You look at where you struggle with it too. So I always tell my people that I'm not a sage on the stage, that I will share my dirt so that you can grow, so that you'll know that this is not a one and done workshop. It is a process. It's a lifetime of investment in yourself. But that's the kind of long and short of how I got interested in this.
Well, I didn't know that whole story, but I do know that when we met, that was one of the things that I liked about you a lot is you walk your talk and you share your dirt. You're not a sage on the stage trying to look good. You're somebody who's willing to talk about what's worked and what hasn't worked with the intention of making a difference for people. And I really like that. And so there you go, everybody. Like it's true. I love it. So, so gosh, there's a lot in that, but the, let's go back just so we don't forget to the Cartman drama triangle. That was the eye opener for you. You saw your own patterns and you stopped blaming others. Tell us, just kind of give us the quick version of that Cartman drama triangle.
Well, it was built by Dr. Stephen Cartman, and it was a model that he used in family therapy. He was a psychiatrist and had written books on it. But the model is basically that when there's relationship dynamics, there are certain, he calls them orientations. I typically refer to it as patterns of thought or behavior. The idea is that we'll see three patterns that work together. So one is the victim, another is the persecutor, and then there's the rescue. So we all know people that take on the victim mentality, the victim behavior. Not my fault. This always happens to me. And then like they very entitled. There's no choices. You need to serve me. I'm very entitled. I'm for me, my background,
Right.
my life. Then the persecutor is very often in the workplace. We'll see a very high performer, but like poor behaviorally. And we often
Yep.
support that. And so that's because we don't consider behavior part of performance. So that's a whole other
Yeah. Which
conversation.
is a freaking huge mistake, but
Yeah, it's
yeah.
major. And so that's, when I get a question about how do I change that, I'm like, well, unless your culture is going to support that, you won't change it. Because if they're getting
Yeah.
accolades for being a rainmaker, you as a leader in a managerial position, you're not going to change it.
Right.
You'll be the one that goes, not them. And
Yeah.
so the persecutor and those behaviors like eye rolling, interrupting, I'm right, you're wrong, I'm a higher performer than you, that kind of personality. And then
Yeah.
there's the rescue role, which is like, oh, let's just walk on eggshells, or we don't want to hurt their feelings, or let me do that for you, or I'm the hero, I'm always taking the hit, I'm the martyr, I'm the sacrifice. So once you start to recognize these patterns, they go sort of in a circle.
Yeah.
And we all typically land on one is where our go-to pattern is. But what I learned from Dr. Cartman, the spoiler alert here, is that, when I do these workshops and I use that model on any level, I'll then take a poll of the audience. How many of you say I can be a victim? You'll get two or three people. You know what? I know I kind of complain. How many of you know that you're a persecutor? You'll get about a tenth of the room. After
Mm.
that, how many know that you're a rescuer? Everybody's a rescuer. That's because we've already analyzed that to be the good role. I'm just trying to help. But what Dr. Cartman says is that if you do one, you do them all. And it makes sense.
Ooh,
Yeah. If you
good.
in other words, they're all dysfunctional and they all create and co-create with the others. And so the way to stop the game is to stop participating whatever role you play. So it's all about personal responsibility, not about pointing out where everybody else is being the victim or persecutor, because that's our normal tendency, is to think I'm the one that's right, but here's what they do. And of course I'm just trying to help. So when I rescue, whenever I let go of a boundary, I'm really just a good person trying to help, but they are playing these roles. Once we realize that the only thing we can change is ourselves, that's when it starts to change the game.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, that's really, really, really great. So the victim, the persecutor, and the rescuer. Of course, the rescuer is the good role. So, but what I love that, like we all have our go-to, but if you do one of these, you do all of these, and they are all dysfunctional. That's just freaking great. They're all pretty disgusting. Um, so, so wow. Okay. So what do you do? Can we stay with this for a minute? And I know that there's more than we could ever get to in our podcast. So you're not going to solve all our problems here, but let's say that we're a leader and we identify that there's this kind of stuff going on around us. What, what can we do?
That's a great question. Really, there's a lot of things we can do, but primarily what I would call the inner game, what we can do is the first thing that we can do is just have awareness of our own pattern. because the game doesn't exist without your pattern. So if you're always fixing someone's problem, for example, let's say that your open door has become a revolving door and you're saying, I've told them 1,000 times. And I'll say, well, what that means is you've allowed it 999 times. So the problem that you have now is to set an appropriate boundary. But if you say, yeah, but my boundary's not working, what I know about a boundary that doesn't work is that you care more about them liking you than you do about setting a boundary, or you don't understand what a boundary is. Therefore, it's a wish, it's a request, but there's no consequence, there's no follow up. There's no choice in your own about what to do about it, because I can't make a boundary if you have the final choice of saying yes or no to that boundary. If I
Right.
say you'll get fired if you come in late one more time, that's a boundary. And if you come in late one more time, you should be fired. And so, from that perspective, you shouldn't set a boundary that's too rough, too harsh, that you can't follow through on. And that's one thing we do as well. I'm mad, I've had it, I'm going to put the hammer down, you're fired. No, you're not going to be fired. You're going to have a talking to. You're going to be docked an hour's pay. We really
Right.
need to understand what's the real boundary that we are willing to comply with, because
Right.
you, as the setter of the boundary, you're becoming a rescuer if you're fixing everybody's problems all the time. And you're blaming them, but it's you contributing to that drama that's creating it.
Yeah. It reminds me of a big breakthrough I had years ago, Marlene. I would love to get your take on this because I realized that, as I alluded to in the opening, I'm like a California surfer dude. I like craft beer. I just want to have a nice conversation and hang out and hang loose. And I don't want to have difficult conversations, like that's uncomfortable and whatever. But I realized that as I was trying to get anything done out there in the world, like I was, I was, so here's what I finally realized. I realized that I was being nice, like with air quotes. And nice, it's not nice to tell somebody they have green stuff in their teeth, right? It's not nice to tell somebody their dress is tucked into their underwear. Like that's all uncomfortable and it's not nice, right? But it is kind, right? And I started to see that I was pursuing this really gross niceness with air quotes that was actually pretty disgusting and that just didn't have me be on the hook for anything, right? Oh, it wouldn't be nice. I'm not going to say anything. I'm not going to have that conversation, whatever, right? But I'm working with people that are depending on me to coach them and support them and push them to get, but I'm being nice. And I decided that for me, nice is disgusting. Nice doesn't take anything and nice doesn't have any benefits. I was going to be kind. And kindness in my book takes something. It takes some courage. It takes a willingness to be uncomfortable for a minute, maybe, all that stuff. But it is kind. It's making a difference, right? It's being willing to have that conversation, say that thing, do that thing that's going to make a difference. What do you think about that?
Well, it's awesome that you have that realization, that self-awareness made you want to change.
It certainly wasn't by myself. I had good coaching, but
Yeah, here's the distinction that makes it shift in my mind is that it's about the intention. If my intention is for you to like me, that's a different intention than for me to help you grow and we stay in relationship. So it always comes from our hidden purpose. I call intention a goal with a soul. So
yeah,
when we're having an intentional conversation, my heart is in this place of seeing you succeed, not in being better than you, not in making you wrong, knowing that it might sting a little bit because anywhere where we're unaware, they say the truth will set you free and the truth hurts. It just
yeah,
depends on how you look at truth. If
yeah,
the truth sets you free, it's because you believe that person has your best interest in heart, and thank goodness that someone saw something that you couldn't. If the truth hurts, it's because you'd rather be right than to shift. And so we have to really look at people and make this agreement up front, especially when we're leading them about this is how we operate. My truth will be to help you succeed. Anything that I bring up will not be for the purpose of making you wrong or hurting you. And although it might sting, your growth is dependent upon being willing to learn and to course correct versus this false pretense of everything's great and we're all going to be Stepford wives and sing kumbaya. So, in my book, I talk about avoiding, appeasing, and aggression, similar to the
mm,
triangle, if you think about it, because they're all
yeah,
dysfunctional. And with that, avoiders know they avoid. So you knew that you avoided, right? You knew I just avoid it. I like to serve. I like to be happy. I like to lay back and have a beer. Like I know that about myself. I'm avoidant. So I can know that, but it doesn't change the pattern. What
Right.
people are generally unaware of is the appeasing part, which is I'm just going to tell you everything's great, even though it's not. I'm going to say agree when I don't. I'm going to smile whenever something hurts, and I'm going to pretend like it's funny. And I'm going to appease because that means more for me, to my ego, for you to like me and think that I'm a good person than it is to have some discomfort and have a real relationship. So the appeasing is a major problem that's out there. Like, love your ideas. I can't do it now. We'll bring this up in the second quarter. Then, when the second quarter comes around, I'm ready for my idea to be shared. It's forgot about because you never meant it in the first place. So
Yeah.
it erodes that trust. And then the aggression part, that can also be a lack of awareness. I know I typically fall on the more aggressive side. I think what happened was sometimes when you find your voice and you've been rescuing, you think you've got it all figured out and you become aggressive because you found your voice and now you're flooded with power and how good that feels. And like people are strong enough to hear my truth. Not always. Sometimes you have to meet people where they are and really kind of be, discerning. So like for me, I'm working on that discernment and the balancing out of that high energy to say, maybe now's not the time, take a breath. I still have to address it, but maybe not right now. That's really hard because once you feel aggression and then you don't address it, you feel better in about 3 hours and you tell yourself, well, we're all adults. I was just feeling cranky. No, you felt something for a reason. It still needs to be addressed. That's the challenge with those three A's. And what I find on the leadership realm is people that are new to leadership often give themselves very high scores for having difficult conversations that get results. What that
Uh-huh.
generally means is I'm aggressive, I'm the boss, the buck stops here. And I think that that's leadership. But in
Yeah.
reality, it just makes people separate from you. They don't trust you, they think you're power hungry. So the more aware you are, the more you know you avoid and appease, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Wow, there's so much in what you just said. That's actually beautiful what you just said. It's so insightful. And makes me realize that I that whole time I was being nice, I was totally doing it because I wanted to be liked. It was way more important to me to be liked than to succeed, period. And then I realized it and I decided instead of, and by the way, nobody really liked me because I wasn't helping them succeed in any way, shape, or form, right? Like, so here I was trying to be liked, but what I was doing wasn't working and people didn't like me anyway. And then I started focusing on being respected. And I don't mean being feared and respected. I mean being genuinely respected for caring about them and giving them good insight and stuff. And I actually created for myself a way of being at that point. I said, okay, instead of being this lame, nicey nice BS, I'm going to be the drill instructor for your greatness.
That's
And
the
that
difference.
was it was incredibly freeing because all of a sudden I could say anything because genuinely my intention was good, right? My goal with the soul was to make a difference for them. And so, as the drill instructor for their greatness, it was on like Donkey Kong.
Right.
And and that was amazing. Now, the other thing that I think is incredibly insightful that I've never heard said this way, but boy, have I experienced it. Maybe on both sides, but I've been on the receiving end way too often. Is this rescuer who finds their voice, right? And then thinks they have it all figured out and then becomes incredibly aggressive and becomes like that, the meanie that they were, protecting from before, right? They step right in it. So if you do one, you do all, right? Rescuer, victim, persecutor, rescuer, victim, persecutor. But that rescuer all of a sudden finds their voice, feels like they've been a victim this whole time, and then starts to persecute, right?
Yeah, it's so hard. I think that the most difficult part of all of this that we're talking about is emotional regulation and
Mm,
also emotional integrity. And I think we can have emotional awareness and still not have integrity or regulation. So, emotional awareness or even emotional intelligence, we use that word a lot. Daniel Goleman, brilliant, brilliant
yeah.
person.
Mm.
I just think we overuse it a lot though, because intelligence is one thing. Like I understand my emotions, I understand how to cope and deal with it. I can still understand how to cope and be totally inauthentic and be totally justifying my behavior because I understand it, because I know it, because I justify having a right to feel the way I did. Or we make excuses as to why we speak up or why we don't. So I talk a lot about something I'm working on, which is emotional integrity. And
I
what
love
that
that.
I take ownership of my experience. That is the hardest thing in the world to do because there are facts and situations surrounding why you're angry with someone, and those facts stand alone. But where we take the integrity is to say, but it's still, I'm the one with the anger. So that's my experience. Like you can't own any part of that. It's the experience that I have, and I know that I'm having it. And I'm not, there's facts, there's things you did, there's things that you crossed a boundary, but I am the one with the experience. Now, within that, do I have the courage to face my dark side and to know that I feel like revenge, or to know that I feel extreme jealousy, or to know that I feel that that's not fair and I got ripped off? Can I at least face that? Even if I'm not going to do anything with it, can I go, wow, that feels pretty bad to see that side of myself that I would think would be more mature? And to really just look at that, to journal it, to say, I don't have to do anything with it. But then at that point, can I then represent myself? Can I say, I'm stung about this. I'm angry and I'm really not ready to talk about it because I really want us to have a productive conversation, or I'm still trying to process and get over this, or I feel a little bit off center with this. So can we talk about it still? To be able to really be honest with people that something's not landing and that you need to process it gives you the time to take ownership of it versus it feels so good to let that steam out and to justify it. And then 3 years later, you look back and say, I wish I would have just seen the bigger picture of this, that life
Mm.
is sometimes unfair, that the person with decision making power makes the decision. And once you make friends with that reality, you're less likely to think the world is going to cooperate by your rules. And then you can just take experience for, you can take responsibility for the one thing you can take responsibility for, which is your experience.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so good. It's so important. And I mean, it really is one of the fundamental things that I have become incredibly sensitized to. And I don't want to go deep into this realm of current politics, but current politics has incredibly made me incredibly sensitized to the absolute unwillingness of so many people to just own their own experience. And it like there's just you own nothing if if you don't own
I
that,
mean,
right?
that's it.
If you're willing to blame other people for your results as a leader, you're never ever going to get the results that you want. You're never going to have a fulfilling life. It's like that is just so incredibly, and I can't believe how often we follow these people
We
and we
buy into
elect
it.
these. Yeah, what?
We are believers in victimhood.
Yeah,
One of my new rules is that because we believe so much in a victim identity and victim, it's not. We've got to separate that things happen and things can be wrong systemically. So that is, yeah, it's a yes and right.
yes, and yep,
At the same time, as long as we believe in and look for victim identity within ourselves or even with others, then we're going to struggle. So what my way of being in this world with that is this: I will never argue with someone's lived experience. If
yeah,
this is how they experience life and they've been victimized and they feel a victim of whatever system because of race, gender, political, religious, disability, ability,
yep,
whatever
yep,
they feel like, whatever that is, like that's their lived experience. I'm not here to argue with that or show facts where that's not true and only you feel that way. Like I'm not here
right,
to do that
but
because you feel what you feel and you
yep,
experience life how you experience it. But I will
yes,
always try to see people and engage with them as if they are the creator of their own reality. Because if you have no choice, you are always a victim. So I always say, what are your choices now? It's true, something happened. What can you choose now? And if we keep going back, I call it to the island called That's Not Fair or What Happened Yesterday. If we're always doing that, we don't build a map of the future. We're living from this record of the past. So we have to acknowledge the true things that are and people's experiences. And then at that point, how do we become empowered, and how do I support you in becoming empowered? I
Yeah.
really don't even want to look at myself as your rescuer. I want to look at you as a partner in your empowerment, and you a partner in mine, because when we start thinking we are the ones that can really take someone forward, and it's up to you as a man to help me as a woman, let's just be partners. Let's be colleagues. Let's co-create. I really like that identity so much better, because I
Yeah.
don't want to have to rely, which I know there's truth in that someone at a higher power should help someone at a lower power. But when you start seeing yourself differently, you get that help. You
Yeah.
just do. It just changes the energy, it changes the vibe. So if I see myself and I identify more with values, and I identify more with choice, and I identify more with opportunity, I will attract that to me. But if I identify
Bingo.
with, God, I'm an old woman, I'm 64 and I'm, a woman, and it's going to be hard. If I identify with that, I'll keep attracting those kinds of things. So I just
Bingo.
try to identify with positivity, with opportunity, with choice, with partnerships, versus the victim story of my limitations.
Yeah. Now, I love where you went with that. And I just want to get your thoughts on the other end of that because, when I love what you said, and I was thinking of something slightly different, like the politicians who are like, oh, that's not my fault. Oh, I had nothing to do with that, right? Like right now, we could go outside our country and see this maybe more easily and less controversially. Vladimir Putin, right? There's causes this war in Ukraine, attacks Ukraine, and all he's been doing is losing the war, and then blaming all of his generals. So he's turned over his high command, like he's fired people. Like the one thing he cannot do is admit he made a mistake, right? And that that's the same thing, right? That's victim mentality. And he's never going to accomplish anything meaningful with that kind of an approach. And I think, as a leader in an organization, as a leader at a startup, it's really important to get that you will be much stronger and more empowered if the buck stops with you versus if you're looking for somebody to blame all the time, right?
Yeah, I always look for that in the language of someone that I want to follow or
Yeah.
emulate. If their language is full of blame or full of justification, that right there, they don't get my vote.
Pew, they're
I don't
gone.
care if they're voting for more money in the economy, for lower prices, for lower taxes. If they have the character, that's sort of like a line in the sand for me, which may or may not be critical thinking. It's just how I make my decisions.
Listen, I'm totally with you. I'm totally with you. If
Yeah,
there's blame and justification, they're not a leader, and I'm not going to vote for him. Sorry.
no, because you don't fix character flaws, and I don't mean to say to anybody what their morality should be. I think we all get to choose that, as long as
Yep.
it's not hurting someone else. So I
Right.
don't want to ever moralize or think that I'm on the moral high ground. But at the core, when someone is always shifting blame and it's someone else's fault, and they can justify not paying someone, or they can justify hurting someone, if that's who they are at their core, they cannot help us to any extent, because that character is what's going to drive everything in the end. In
Right.
the end,
And
always will.
it's not a judgment and it's not a morality play. It's a fact of how it goes,
How it
right?
works. Yeah.
So I think that's really important to remember when you're hiring. I think it's really important to remember when you're interviewing. If you're thinking of taking a job, if that leader you're going to be working for is full of blame and justification, I don't think I would recommend it. And if that
You just have
person
to
you're
learn to listen for it, though, because it's really easy for us to buy in. And
yeah,
we buy in because of certain facts, right? We buy
yep,
in because of, yes, this happened and it shouldn't have, or yes, these circumstances came about. So
yeah,
we don't know how to listen. It's an inner game kind of thing to learn to hear that, and it's really
yeah,
slight. And you almost have to work on that to such an extent yourself, to have that BS meter.
yeah,
Like, I feel like I have a really great BS meter when someone's making a promise that seems, like it seems just too much, or when
Right.
someone's trying to use someone else, like I feel that I've got a really strong meter that sounds off as lack of personal responsibility. And I don't judge it. I just watch it for a while to see if the pattern persists,
Yeah.
because everybody can have a one-off lapse in judgment, or they make a decision and they've learned and they've grown from it. So I don't really come from the idea that your character is solid and integrity is all the way through, although some people do think that. I think
Hmm.
we all have some lapses and some things are up for debate. But when you start seeing a pattern of just lack of responsibility and blaming, and it's someone else's fault, and this shouldn't have happened to me, and I have no choice, when I hear there were no other choices but to do X, almost every murder that happens, there was some justification. Well, I
Right.
had no other choice but to do X.
Right.
Because a real responsible choice is about understanding the consequence of the choice.
Yeah. Well, so now let's flip it for a minute. That's what not to do, right? Let's talk about what to do, like what to look for in a good leader, and what to do if you find yourself maybe using the language of blame and justification. What can people do? What are some of your thoughts around that?
Well, you mean as like an employee, how could they call that out, you mean? Or do you mean like how we as a boss would be calling it out?
How about both?
I think we have to learn how to, first of all, be aware of our own narrative and judgments that we have, and not believe everything we think. So, although I have a BS meter, I don't think I know the whole story of that person or what they even meant. So, what I have to
Yeah.
be able to do is to say that felt a certain way. That registered in me as a little bit of doubt. Like I felt like they were being sarcastic and putting me down a little bit. So now do I not trust them and say, hey, lack of character because they tease in such a way that you can't trust someone like that? Or do I go to them and say, hey, I wanted to circle back around. When you said X, the way I took it was Y. Is that what you meant? We have to be able to be curious enough and give someone the chance to save face, because most of the time when people have these little habits and patterns, it's sort of a coping method sometimes. It's
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
really as much character, it's more of a coping method thing, that it's a blind spot. So if we want to be partners to them in their success, we say, I noticed last week, whenever every time I brought this up, you interrupted, and it seemed to me like you disagreed and maybe even disrespected my point of view. I'm open to hearing how you see it. They're probably going to go, oh no, you're just being sensitive. Most of the time people do not want to admit they're blind.
Of course.
Awareness creates aversion at first
Yeah.
until we're ready to
Uh-huh.
go. And then they might think about it later and say, I got to thinking and maybe I was a little harsh. But
Yeah.
you open up the conversation, they go, oh no, you're just being too sensitive. What do you do with that? That's where we get stuck. You say, okay,
Yeah.
well, maybe I am, but in the future, this is what I need from you.
That's good. Okay.
Because we don't really have to fight about, yes, you were, no, you weren't, yes, and then you said this, and then last year
Right.
you did that, and I've noticed with Sally you do this. You don't do that.
No,
Don't
no,
don't
right.
get
That
into that
doesn't work.
distraction. Just say, here's what I need from you. Like, what makes me feel supported is this.
Yeah.
We
Like,
represent ourselves. Here's what I need.
yeah.
Like, I'm not
Yeah.
speaking for anybody else in the room about what you've done to other people, but like, I noticed that in the meeting, I felt really uncomfortable because you interrupted John 3 times. Well, that's up to John. Perhaps it is. However, I'm speaking to what I need in the meeting. I need to hear everybody's voices, and I need to hear John's as well. So, like, yeah, it is between you and John, but I'm telling you what my lived experience is and what I
Yeah.
need as your leader, or what I need as your coworker. And the next time that happens and you interrupt, I'm gonna call a pause. So I just wanted to warn you up front,
Yeah.
because I don't think you mean to do it. So that we start taking charge of our energy and about what we want. We ask for what we want. We set boundaries. We listen.
Yeah.
We own the truth of what's going on for us, instead of, well, everybody else says that you're an interrupter. I mean, I'm okay with it, but like,
Right.
I know you're a guy, but 3 people said you interrupted. Like, who said it? Well, I can't tell you. Like, that
Right.
causes problems. So
No,
you just
that's yeah.
represent yourself.
Very good. Yeah. I mean, that's excellent. That is what works. Another thing, Marlene, that I discovered around the same time as I was having that drill instructor for your greatness breakthrough was I made everything mean so much. Like I would, if I had a difficult quote unquote conversation to have, I had to tell something what wasn't working or something, I would go into it like it was some really big deal. And it kind of wasn't. It was once I dropped the meaning and I was just like, look, here's what works. Here's what you did. Here's what I think you could do better so it would work better. Right. Like that doesn't mean anything. It
No.
just is what it is. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I do something similar when I'm coaching people, like when they're in their drama. If a leader is like really fed up, they've had conflict with someone for 6 months, and they're like, they don't care, they're not engaged, they're rude. Well, those are all just perceptions and interpretations. My question is, what are they doing that they should not be doing? What are they doing that they should not be doing? Well, I don't know. It's hard to say. They just have a bad attitude. So, what are they not doing they should be doing? Hard to say. We just clash. So what are they doing or not doing? Because until you answer that, it's just your personality.
Yes.
And you're
Yeah.
just complaining about someone. And so then after that, after we answer that, how does that affect the business? Whether it's customer service, whether it's teamwork, whether it's revenue, whether it's sales, how does it affect the operations? Because if it's not causing a problem, is it just you nitpicking? Or is it really causing a problem? Like it helps people to get clear on when am I just being overly micromanaging, or when am I nitpicking because I don't like you for whatever you said that hurt my feelings and I'm not aware enough to know that. And when is
Right.
it really like, you know what, they're not answering the phone on Tuesdays and what we've missed 4 sales because of that. Now
Yeah.
we've got something to work with, and it's simply about the facts. It's not about my interpretation of you, whether you care or not, whether you're the right fit. We won't know that till we have the conversation. But I
Right.
always say that the information will come through the conversation, not before the conversation. So the part
Ooh,
of
good.
the unknown is that when I'm really having a difficult conversation with someone, I have to quit thinking I already know everything about it and everything they're going to say. Because if I already knew that, you'd either continue working here or you wouldn't, and we wouldn't have an unresolved problem. So what I have to do is to view conflict as opposing drives, desires, and demands. And I have to get really curious about, is this about clarity, resources, priorities, skills, or willingness? And once I get curious about it, I'm thinking like a consultant, and I'm going, well, walk me through. Well, why would you say that? Well, when did that happen? Well, my view was this. And in that conversation, you'll know what it is. You'll know
Yeah.
they didn't get their training. During those 3 months, we had two people off on pregnancy leave and one had COVID. They didn't get training. They jumped right in. Now we know they need remedial because they're missing some key parts. Now we know. And it came through the conversation, not because of my assumption that they're not the right fit or they don't care.
Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. I love that. This is such a joy to talk to you. And I notice we're getting close to the end of the hour. I have another question for you that I'd really love to get your thoughts on. Um, you know, maybe like you, I don't know, but I have a pretty large, percentage of my clientele that's women. And I love supporting women and women's voices. And I think there's just no question that women get treated differently in the workplace still and all that kind of stuff. Here's one thing I wonder how, like, because one of the things that I see as an issue and hear about as an issue a lot is women getting credit for their work.
Mm.
Men, out in the workplace are pretty happy to take credit for stuff, where, whereas women tend to share the credit and, they talk a lot more in terms of we did this versus the men saying I did this. And one of the issues that I hear about a lot from the women that I coach is that issue, right? The men getting credit where the women don't get credit, but maybe the women did more work and were smarter and better and harder, but they're not getting the credit. How do you have any thoughts about that?
Gosh, I don't have a whole lot of thoughts because I work with a lot of men. And
That's funny.
they are happy to get credit. I haven't specifically dealt with that, but I think part of it, well, we're going to judge each other based on gender, and that's never going to change. We're not going to ever have 100% equality because it's just not ever. I'm not saying it's okay the way it is. I'm just saying that if you have eyes and ears and experiences, you're going to have biases, right? So I'm going to see things because of where I was born and who I am and what I've experienced, no matter how hard I try not to.
Yep.
So everybody's lived experience is different. So I would say I would dig a little deeper to say, what in you is creating this experience and say, rather than men are not recognizing my experiences or I'm not seeing, are you not seeing yourself? Are you giving away your power to like use the we more often than to say, here's what I was able to accomplish. I do want to thank some people for supporting me. Like in your language, could you actually say it differently? Or most of the time, I think that when we don't feel seen, we're also not seeing ourselves. I've
Yeah.
seen it for myself for sure. I've often felt not seen or that my work, like I've done as much as they have. Why am I not getting these awards or why am I not, being considered to be the speaker, the consultant? Those
Yeah.
things are going to happen in business and we'll never fully figure it out because sometimes someone was already chosen before they did the RFP. I mean, there's lots of things that
Yeah.
go on that we'll never
Yeah.
know. The
Yeah.
most important thing is this: the story that's been resolved no longer needs to be told. So if I am telling the story of I'm not being respected because I'm a woman, how can I resolve that? And to say, because I'm a woman, I have special abilities and I partner well with women and men, and people do see my worth because I see my worth. And whenever someone steps in and takes credit, I jump in to correct it because I know my worth is enough. And I'm not angry, but I'm like, get clear about your
Yeah.
narrative because it's
Yeah.
helping to create that experience.
That's wonderful. I love that. I love that. That's great. Well, so listen, is there anything that we didn't talk about, Marlene, that you'd like to talk about? I mean, gosh, I will put this in the show notes, but I'm sure that people can find From Conflict to Courage at Amazon. Yeah.
Right.
Um,
Absolutely.
Anything else that we, didn't talk about? I got to imagine you deal with many of these things in From Conflict to Courage.
I do. I talk a lot about identity. So, and that's a little bit about what we just talked about, the narrative and how I
Uh
see
huh.
myself. So, work on your identity and start to look for evidence to the contrary. And you'll find that sometimes you were getting accolades and you didn't even see it. You didn't hear it. You didn't notice it. Here's an example.
Mm.
My book, From Conflict to Courage, it was longlisted by Get Abstract. So what that meant, out of 25,000 books out there, it's the top 10 of in the field of learning and development. Well, I didn't even know what that was. So my like when I first got this long list, I saw some man post about his book made this long list. I'm going to call him Steven. I don't know if that's his name or not, but just for the
Yep.
sake of example.
Yep.
I saw Steven's post on LinkedIn. Hey, my book was nominated. My first thought was that Steven won something. And I saw my book up there, but I didn't pay much attention because my mom was in a nursing home. That's where most of my attention was going. And while it was nice, it's just not that relevant. I
Yeah.
mean, I wasn't even that excited to see my book with someone else's. I didn't think anything about it. Now, there's an example of not noticing, right?
It's a
So
really good.
I
Yeah.
congratulated him. God, congratulations. I didn't even know what my book was considered. So the story in my head was Stephen won some award and my book was also considered because that's the way as a man it came off as I won and everybody here's the other peons that are also considered. So and I thought, and I agreed with it 100%. Good for
Yeah.
you. I'm glad I was. Let me bow down to your greatness. So then I get an email from my publisher that says, congratulations, great news. Your book has got an international award. It's still considered an international award. It was longlisted by Get Abstract. And I went, yeah, great, but Stephen won. So yeah, yay, and then that's how I was about it. And then after that, I got an email from someone from Switzerland that said, Marlene, congratulations, your book From Conflict to Courage was longlisted. We'd like to invite you to the ceremony in Germany. Okay, now this was like a month out, which my head said this. Well, that's a very long way to go. And I mean, Stephen's probably won. And I don't know what that means to be longlisted. And like, that's expensive. And I made up all the reasons not to see myself. And then one day I started playing with some of the concepts in my book about identity. And I went, what if I saw myself as a global thought leader? I would hop on a plane and be over there saying, thank you for including me. And I thought, I'm going to adopt that attitude. And it does not matter if I win or get a short list or anything. It's not about that ego trip. It's about an identity of saying, I see myself as someone deserving to be at this ceremony. So I went. And it was really scary for me because I have not been out of North America. I've been to Canada. I've been all across the United States. I didn't know about exchanging money. I didn't know about those things. I've wanted to do it, but I've been caring for an elderly person for quite a while. It's been a major part of
Yeah.
my life.
Yeah.
But the point I'm making here is that I'm being recognized and I don't notice it the first time. I don't notice it the second time. And the third time when I'm invited, I kind of think I'm not quite there yet. So like it's a lot of money to actually go on a trip like that. You don't know if you won. So maybe you don't go unless you know you won. It's like all those reasons to not be noticed. But if you
Yeah,
go from the perspective of I've already won and I'm going to meet people there that have also won and meet people that decided this was worthy, that's a different mindset of being recognized.
totally. What a great, great story to share to illustrate that. And you went and you had a great time, right?
Yeah, and I learned some German too. So, I mean, I learned German before I went because I thought I want to learn. I've been studying Spanish for a while, but I thought it's going to be more fun to be learning two languages at once, and I'm going to learn different cultures, and I'm probably going to be really tired, but it's going to shift my identity to someone who can make a decision quickly and invest in themselves versus someone who's never quite there yet.
Yeah,
And someone that already sees some man as the winner first versus it could be me,
right.
and so
Yep.
I did not expect that, and I'm glad I didn't because I would have been disappointed, I guess, but it was not about any of that. It was about identity and about seeing your own greatness in whatever form that shows up versus, well, it's always someone else because the truth is, I didn't expect any award like that. I didn't apply for it. I didn't go for it. I didn't even know about it. So why should I be disappointed?
Yeah.
It was awesome, you
Yeah.
know.
Well, so I want to acknowledge you for whatever it took for you to see yourself as somebody that had a message that meant enough to write a book about it. Because I think you make an enormous difference for a lot of people all around the world. And I think you are brilliant. And I just love that you took all that experience and wisdom and all that stuff that you got when you were working in the warehouse, you know, right? Because you bring a lot of that. Like you've got a very grounded
Mhm.
wisdom about you. And I think it's because of that experience. And so
Yes.
I got to imagine that it was maybe a little bit scary stepping out and really going ahead and putting your thoughts in a book and making that available. And is it, you know, what are people going to think? And, so
Well, this
thanks for
was
the
actually my
courage.
5th book. This was my 5th book, so I have other books too. But
Okay.
this is the culmination, I think, written in such a way. This book was really fun for me. My
Uh
first
huh.
commercially published book was Stop Workplace Drama, and it was with Wiley. Then I had No Drama Leadership with another publisher. Then I had 7 Ways to Stop Drama in Your Healthcare Organization. And this one just kind of came about because when COVID came about, I thought, well, maybe I might get a book deal. And I don't know why I intuitively think that because I know you have to
Yeah.
write a proposal first. So I just went ahead and started working on a proposal, and the intuition was right. An actual publisher reached out to me.
Wow.
I
Good.
didn't get it with them. They introduced me to Barrett Kohler, but it's like we have to trust a little bit of an inner knowing, and it's
Yeah.
not believing in fairies, but saying I know I'll have to do work. So I'm going to go ahead and put that to action, even if it's kind of a crappy little proposal. Maybe there, through my desire and the intention to do it, it's going to organize energy, and that's exactly what happened. So this book was really fun to write. They're, a pretty supportive publishing company. They have it peer reviewed. So that's the scary and good part. But I felt like it was so easy to write because, in a way, I'm continuing to write the same things in ways that are deeper and more profound and more
Yeah.
easily understood and more practical. As time gets going, it becomes more simple, it's simpler even.
Yeah.
So this one wasn't scary until it got peer reviewed. And with people that the way our world is right now, like you mentioned, the politics and the sensitivities that we have right now, some things that I would say, they go like, oh, this is going to offend a certain group of people or whatever, and I'd be like, I'm very clear on it though, because I know my intention and I understand the repercussion, but I'm not going to agree to victimhood. I'm going to say things have happened, but that we have power, and when we recognize it, we have even more. So I really stuck with
Yeah.
some of that message, and I took what people said to heart for sure. And I really meditated on it. But I also knew that this was my act of courage to speak what I believe. And then if I'm wrong about it or I change my mind, that's another opportunity for courage, because we evolve and we change and so on. So in that way, it was scary. And maybe one day I'll be like, God, I was totally an idiot. Who knows what I meant? But I feel that it's a good message right now for where we are. And I am proud of it.
Good. Good. Well, and thank you. I feel like, so maybe my acknowledgement was meant for that version of you 5 books ago who didn't have a book and said, I think I have something to say and I'm going to trust myself enough that I'm going to go say it. Right. And then I think I always think leadership and communication that's always an act of courage because it's just dangerous to get noticed by the group, you know?
I
Look what
didn't know
happened.
that at first though, and if I think back on it, like some of it, like this book felt so like from the heart and so pure in its intention. I will say my first book was me excited thinking that a book was going to change my life, which it does in certain ways, but there's this belief out there when everybody wants to write a book and they don't understand what it takes in platform and all this kind of stuff. And I was in that place too, very naive, very green, and really overly proud of things that I should have maybe dug a little deeper on. And then the other book from No Drama Leadership, I felt that one was so hard for me to write. I feel like that was more about me wanting to prove myself than it was about the work I wanted to get out in the world. I still
Uh-huh.
have people say that book helped them and changed them. So it's not like the work itself wasn't valuable because I'm giving what I have to give at that time.
Yeah.
But the intention from which that book came might have been more about me proving that my work is good.
Yeah.
This one, I already knew the work was good and helpful, and I just couldn't wait for people to read it. So there was just a different intention with this one.
Yeah.
And before I needed people to go, great book, or like you got so many Amazon reviews. This time I didn't care because the writing of
Yeah.
the book it's going to do its magic. That's how I felt.
Yeah. Well, that's fabulous. So, Marlene, thank you very much for joining us. I'm only stopping because I promised I would. Um, but I think that, this is just such great work. And I really love I love your clarity and your ability to communicate the value of just taking responsibility. I think it's just the fundamental thing for fulfillment as a human being. I think without taking responsibility for your own life, there's just fulfillment's always a distant dream. And I think that's what I hear is maybe one of the largest operating principle underneath all of this. And you articulate it so well. And I love your examples. So thank you very much for joining us. Is there anything you want to say before we go?
I'll just end by saying something I say a lot, and it is that disagreement doesn't ruin relationships, disrespect does. If
Ooh,
you know
good.
that, you can maintain a relationship. That's the only thing you need to know is that disagreement doesn't ruin a relationship, disrespect does.
Fabulous. Fabulous. Well, thank you very much for joining. I think that's a great thing to remember as we speak like leaders. And I think everything you brought super valuable. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for
And
having me.
and to those of you listening, thank you for joining us. If you like the show, please tell your friends. And if you would be willing to give us a 5-star review and a little bit of why you like us, that would be great. It would help other people find the show. And again, Marlene, thank you very much for joining us. And we will have links to all of your stuff in the show notes. And I really appreciate your time.
Thank you. We'll help share it as well.
Awesome.
Bye.
See you later. See you next time on SpeakLikeALeader.show. Thank you for joining the Speak Like a Leader podcast. Go be awesome.